Happening right now, Middlesex DA Marian Ryan and Malden police are expected to announce an arrest has been made in connection with a 30-year-old homicide cold case. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. I am joined today by Assistant District Attorney Dave Sollett, the Chief of our Cold Case Unit, the Chief of Police from Malden, Kevin Molis, Detective Lieutenant Duke Donahue, the head of our State Police Unit, Captain Glenn Cronin, Detective Steve Mulcahy, and Detective Mike Powell, all from the Malden Police Department. We are today announcing that an individual named Rodney Daniels has been charged with first-degree murder in the murder of Patricia Moreno in Malden on January 20th, 1991. Today, a grand jury returned an indictment for first-degree murder. That indictment arose out of an incident that allegedly occurred at 2123 Henry Street in Malden, where Patricia, known to her family and loved ones as Tricia, was found shortly after 3 a.m. on the morning of July 20th on the fire escape outside the third-floor apartment where she was living. Tricia was suffering from a single gunshot wound to the head, and she was, at that time, living at that address with a foster family, which consisted of her foster mom's two biological daughters, as well as the boyfriend, Mr. Daniels, of one of those daughters, who occasionally stayed at the apartment. When the police and emergency medical personnel arrived, Patricia was alone. She was face down on that third-floor fire escape. She was at that point still breathing but seriously injured. Although rushed to the hospital, she did not survive that wound to her head. The investigation revealed that no weapon or cartridge casing was located on the scene, either directly on the fire escape or in the immediate area. The surviving occupants of the apartment were interviewed. They claimed that they had heard a pair of gunshots, but had no information as to the identity of the shooter. There was no evidence of any forced entry into their apartment. During a subsequent investigation, police interviewed Rodney Daniels, who claimed that he had been in the living room of the apartment sleeping in an armchair, that he was awakened by the sound of two gunshots. He walked out to that fire escape where Tricia often went to sit and smoke a cigarette, since the foster mother did not permit smoking inside the apartment. During the course of their subsequent investigation, the police learned that Rodney Daniels had been in possession of multiple handguns in the period of time leading up to Tricia's death. They also learned that in the weeks before the shooting, that Rodney Daniels had engaged in threatening behavior towards Ms. Moreno. Over the course of the years, many people were interviewed, various leads were followed up on, but no arrests were made. In 2020, after the case had been assigned to our new cold case unit, the crime scene investigators returned to the apartment, reconstructed using various forensic information, reconstructed where Patricia Moreno had been on that fire escape and where someone would have had to have shot her while she was out there. In searching for new information, the investigators re-interviewed witnesses, and they were also able to find a witness who had been out of the United States for an extended period of time. That witness, who they located, had been living at the time of the shooting on the second-floor apartment in that building. He revealed that on the night of the murder, he had been awakened by a loud noise, and because of the positioning of his bed, was able to immediately look out onto the fire escape. He provided a physical description of the individual who we saw out on that fire escape in that area, which was consistent with the appearance of Rodney Daniels. And he described that person who he had seen immediately disappearing back into the apartment where Patricia Moreno was living at that point. The individual went back into that apartment and closed the door behind them. In addition, investigators interviewed a witness who had had information at the time, but because of relationships and family ties had not fully disclosed all of that information. Because of changed circumstances, that witness was finally willing to provide investigators with the information that had been withheld since that time. As a result of that new information, plus all of the work they had done on this case, the investigators applied for and obtained a warrant from the Malden District Court for the arrest of Rodney Daniels on the charge of murder. On Monday of this week, Mr. Daniels was arrested in South Fulton, Georgia, without incident. He is expected to return to the Massachusetts area today. He will be arraigned tomorrow in Middlesex Superior Court. And I want to particularly call your attention to the fact that this case is indicative of the commitment this office has made, that when someone loses a loved one to a homicide, we will not give up in our pursuit of finding out who should be held accountable for that. In this case, we had a 17-year-old young girl who was living in a foster home, sitting outside of her own home on a summer evening having a cigarette, whose life was taken. This investigation took many twists and turns over 30 years. And ultimately, this case was solved not because of a forensic breakthrough, not because of a DNA discovery, but really because of the hard work and persistence, both of the chief of my cold case unit, Mr. Sollett, who was brought back to this office in 2019 to work on these cases, as well as the dedication of the investigators from the Malden Police Department and the state police. And that is the commitment that we have made to families, that we will never give up on a case. This case is emblematic of that. We know that whenever we make these kind of announcements, it is bittersweet, because on the one hand, we are finally able to hold someone accountable. On the other hand, as was the case yesterday in talking to Tricia's loved ones, it certainly brings back a well of memories, takes people back to probably what was one of the worst incidents in their lives. But that is what we are committed to doing. So I'm happy to turn it over now to Chief Molis to address the impact on his community as well as the work of his department.
Thank you very much, Marian. I can call you Marian because we've known each other for a long time. Developed a great relationship and a friendship between your office and mine. You know, as I stand here and listen to the district attorney give a factual account of the circumstances that led to this day, I was a bit overwhelmed at the enormity of it. This is a powerful day, as Marian said. It sends out a powerful message. And as I stood and heard the facts presented, and I looked over at Patricia's image there, a couple of personal observations resonated within me. Many times in life, we hear words of Scripture that could be said at a memorial service or a funeral. And it's from Psalm 130 that says, "Out of the depth I cried, Lord, hear my voice." And I could only think of that the voice of Patricia crying out over these 30 years, "Someone hear my voice and don't forget me." That did not happen. As I stood there, I also remembered something when I was a little kid, when President Kennedy died, a murder victim, and the eternal flame that burns at his grave today. And it was President Kennedy who, in his inaugural address, said that the torch had been passed to a new generation. Well, this case today represents an eternal flame, but a torch that has been passed to different generations. This case was solved by police officers and district attorneys and assistant district attorneys who in 1991 were probably not cops, probably not assigned to the role of solving cases. But that eternal flame of grief and remembrance was passed on to a new generation of cops, a new generation of assistant district attorneys, to a different district attorney than was in office in 1991. This case represents the passage of time, the passage of that torch, but it was a passage that was continual, a resolve to never let a victim be forgotten. And that's what this case represents. It sends out a strong but a real message. We can send out messages that sound good, but it's days like today where those words have meaning, where they have reality. And this is a day in which we look at our promises to victims, we look at the messages that we send, and we can say, at the end of this day, we did our job. We kept the faith. we fulfilled our promise. As the district attorney said, this is something the victims of, the family of the victims carry with them grief. We carry with them the promise that we will do everything we can to solve these crimes. Their grief does not go away because of today, but there is at least a level of accountability that is attached to the promise that was made back to them in 1991, that we would do everything we could. So that torch that was passed to a new generation of cops and ADAs and district attorneys still shines bright to anyone that is out there that feels that they are a victim of crime. We are here for you. And I would end by saying, if there's somebody out there who has committed crimes, let the message be told, we don't forget. I'm surrounded by humble greatness today. Humility and greatness combined to solve this case. It's that same drive and passion that drives us to solve all our cases. And if you're out there and you think you got away with something, remember today, and remember that we do not forget, and we do our jobs today and for the next generation to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We're happy to take a couple of questions if anybody has one.
Your department obviously for not giving up on this case. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the arrest? And for 30 years, this person has been free. And what was the process of the arrest? And what was, I guess, their reaction to knock on their door 30 years after this crime was likely?
My understanding is from the investigators who were down in Georgia that it happened very swiftly. It happened without incident, and there was nothing particularly remarkable about the arrest. They went there with a warrant, along with the assistance of the police officers from South Fulton, Georgia, who assisted, and the arrest was made relatively quickly.
I know it's still early. Is there any intel on any kind of motive at this time?
Well, we do know that there was this period of time in the weeks and months leading up to the date of the shooting where the allegations are that there was sort of a continuing threatening behavior allegedly on the part of Mr. Daniels towards Ms. Moreno, that he had been in possession of guns, that he was perturbed by her for some reason, and had been very threatening towards her.
Yeah, can you describe what that emotional conversation was like with Patricia's family yesterday? And then secondarily, just what's this been like for your department to achieve something like this after such a long period of time in its place?
Of course. With respect to Ms. Moreno's family, I think their initial reaction was really just shock. I think, as is to be expected in some sense, after 30 years, you probably never expect that you will get that phone call that someone's been held accountable for your child's death. And that's the important thing to remember. This is their child, their sister, and for them on this day, life stopped with respect to her. And to have, people reach out after this time to say, we've been to a place where we can hold somebody accountable. This is a long road now. Once he's returned, a long road from now until we go to trial, but at least we have a road to travel along. I think that as well as expressing great gratitude to the investigators, her family, who was incredibly gracious, really saw this as we do. Very often when we tell families, despite the fact that incredible effort is being made, we haven't gotten to a conclusion. That's very frustrating. On top of the loss of someone, to feel like, is somebody really working on it? And they were very clear that they hope this sends the same message to families. What we say all the time, yes, there can be a forensic breakthrough, but what most often happens is life changes for people. People get found who we hadn't found before. People are in a different place in their life. They feel able to tell us something that maybe they didn't tell us before. And as the chief said, and as I indicated earlier, we continue to go back. We are looking at people. Could this person tell us something else? Was it worth it to go and talk with this person again? That is usually the kind and the level of persistence that leads to a good result.
To that point, sorry about
Go
that.
ahead.
So, to that point, was there something that led to your cold case unit reconstructing the scene and figuring out where a shooter would have had to have been for Patricia to have lost her life?
I think it was a combination, as I mentioned, both of wanting to go out and just take again, actually recreate where somebody would have been, what the logistics had to be of how she could have been on that spot and where the perpetrator needed to have been. And then working backwards from if the perpetrator needed to be in a particular place, who could have gotten to that place, as well as just good, solid investigative work of looking through and saying, I see we've talked to someone, did they have more to tell us? Or someone seems to have been unavailable for a period of time, let's go find them again and see what they might have. Life circumstances change, and when you are working away at it and you're going back to people, sometimes that is fruitful and you get that piece of information you need. Christina?
You announced your cold case unit in, I think, March 2019.
Yes.
Is this the first case that's been solved as a result of that?
This is the first. We have obviously solved other, particularly the Jane Britton and those other cases that are very old. We've had several of those. This is the first under the direction of Dave Solid, who came back to the office to run our unit.
And then I'm curious if you foresee any challenges in proving this case in court since the evidence is so old at this point.
Well, we are confident. We would not make an arrest if we were not confident that we will be able to meet our burden. Obviously, there are challenges, as there are in any homicide case, new or old, with respect to getting people actually into the courtroom at some point down the road when we go to trial. But we do not make an arrest unless we are confident that we're prepared to go forward. Yes. Thank you all very much.
We've been listening to the DA Marian Ryan give the details of the arrest of 48-year-old Rodney Daniels for the 30-year-old murder of 17-year-old Patricia Moreno in 1991. He is now charged with first-degree murder. Tricia was living with a foster family at the time, and there is a warrant for the arrest of Rodney Daniels out for murder. He was arrested in Georgia without incident and returned to Massachusetts today. He'll be arraigned tomorrow